So I was looking into Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun, and I noticed a lot of people talking about M. John Harrison's Viriconium series in the same breath and making favorable comparisons. They're both of the same subgenre, the Dying Earth, named after the Jack Vance book of the same name. The Dying Earth. Which leans a little bit too fantasy for my taste, but it was a good book. The subgenre is basically about an Earth so far in the future that the futuristic civilization has long fallen. Humanity is essentially back to a medieval level, but living with the relics of a futuristic past. Once again, Clarke's Law applies. So even though I didn't respond to Vance's book, I was really intrigued by the ideas in the Dying Earth subgenre. So I checked out the heavy hitters, and in the end it was between the Book of the New Sun and Viriconium for me. And I'm a pretty positive guy, so if you put two books in front of me, and one's called Shadow of the Torturer, and the other is The Pastel City, I am choosing The Pastel City. I wish I had the better cover for this. This cover's okay. Guys, I love this book so much. You have no idea. I think it's important to note that this book was published in 1971 because there are elements we tend to think of as being introduced later into sci-fi that are present here. I'm not going to reveal too many of them here just because it's really awesome when the book just matter-of-factly introduces them. But as an example, this book has laser swords. I'm not saying M. John Harrison invented laser swords, but I'm too lazy to do the research on how far back laser swords go. But you can be sure George Lucas did not invent laser swords. Perfected them? Maybe. Overdid them? Anyway, we have one viewpoint character throughout the book, and it's Tegeus-Cromis, a former member of the Methven, a kind of Knights of the Round Table bunch who had worked for the King of Viriconium, but they had disbanded some decades ago. Tegeus-Cromis, as the book points out many times, fancies himself more of a poet than a swordsman, and composes songs throughout the story. He's hermited himself in a tower by the shore, content to work on his words, when civil war in Viriconium unexpectedly finds its way to his door. The king has died. His daughter Methven-Nyan, aka Queen Jane, now rules Viriconium, but her cousin, allied with the violent Northmen, is marching on the city to take control. Tegeus-Cromis has to get the band back together to defend who they see as the rightful ruler of Viriconium. So the plot's pretty standard as these books go, with a few twists along the way. But it's the world building that really shines here. The ideas, the tantalizing breadcrumbs of other adventures, the relics of the past, suggesting all manner of future events, both good and bad. Repeated mention is made of Benedict Postmanley, a Methven who is not available to be recruited for this adventure, since a while back he took an expedition to the moon, and as far as anyone knows, he's still there. Some of the world building is expanded upon, some of it's just there for color. I'm here for all of it. If I have one quibble, it's with the end of the book. Without getting into spoilers, the book ends abruptly for both story and story structure reasons, so the end feels a little rushed. Still a tremendous book, though. I got about halfway through this book and was struck by how much of a prototypical dark second story it was shaping out to be. It made me realize how much I enjoyed the comparatively whimsical nature of the Pastel City and how much I missed the vibe of that book. There's an oppressive, haunted vibe here that I found a bit challenging at first, but it was interesting enough to keep me going. And then things got really crazy. If you're enjoying this video, why not buy my book? Flight of the Pangolin is the story of an intrepid group of heroes who decide to exit the solar system over the objections of an isolationist faction. There's actually a lot more going on than that. There's space pirates, a giant spider for no reason, all kinds of other things. Buy it now online wherever you buy books or at our website, www.thepangolinrepublic.com. You can also get fun t-shirts and random other stuff if you want. 80 years have passed since the North was defeated. In that time, most of the Methven heroes of the first book have passed on. In place of Tegeus-Cromis as a protagonist, we're given Galen Hornrack, a man of nobility but no station, slumming it in the Low City as an assassin. He's no Tegeus-Cromis, and the book agrees with me on that, which is probably the point. He's a more interesting character for the comparison. The reborn Alstath Fulthor, a late arrival in the previous book, returns here as a main character. The Reborn are a great weird idea to begin with, and they get expanded upon here in detail, and it's really something. I don't want to get into it here too much due to spoilers, but their arc is definitely a highlight of the book. In case you were worried that all the Methven were gone, I'm happy to report that Tomb the Dwarf, at 150 years old, is back and just as awesome as before. Except something is very wrong in Viriconium, and once he begins to investigate, he seems to realize that there's a problem more than most of the other characters. Except Seller the Birdlord, of course. He's once again trying to alert someone, anyone, that something's wrong. That something may involve a new religion that's spreading through the city, the Sign of the Locust, who are advocating the idea that reality is not an objective thing, which neatly fits into the psychological issues plaguing the Reborn, who are schismed maybe 3/4 into their old lives and only partially into the present. So the second half of the book kicks the plot into high gear, with a lot happening in a small span of time. The second half also turns out to be where all the fun, weird stuff in the book is being stored. While the Pastel City was super well written, there's a lot more descriptive, flowery prose going on in A Storm of Wings. Very meditative, lots of tangents that mostly eventually circle around to being relevant. But this was definitely a more challenging, deeper read in the first half than the Pastel City was, until the bonkers second half really outdid the first book for that imaginative weirdness I was looking for. So, uneven, challenging, but definitely still worth checking out. If the story of the painter Ashlyme attempting to rescue his colleague, the brilliant Audsley King, from the plague-ridden Low City in Viriconium doesn't raise your interest, you may want to stop here in your Viriconium journey. But you've gone this far, you might as well just keep going. There's very little science fantasy here, beyond references also made in previous stories, and the odd new idea. Like the Barley Brothers, a pair of aliens who've taken human form for what purpose only they know. They spend most of their time carousing around the city, being generally just a pair of rabble-rousing layabouts. It wouldn't be a Viriconium story without a dwarf. So here we get the Grand Cairo, who works both for and is paranoid of the Barley Brothers. He's a schemer and dangerously violent at times. Much of the rest of the characters populating the story are artists, astronomers, patrons of the arts, that sort of thing. The plague that spreads through the city doesn't appear to be communicable in the ways we think of illnesses. The plague is limited to specific areas, but our hero Ashlyme doesn't seem bothered by his many trips to the artist's quarter to care for Audsley King, who is ill in many traditionally human ways. The plague even has metaphysical effects on the city itself, which I thought was pretty cool. For those paying attention to previous books, the preface goes to great lengths to disabuse you of the notion that canon is a thing here. And this story takes place basically whenever it feels like it in relation to the other books. While certainly not a waste of my time, as a fan of science fiction, but not so much a fan of science fantasy, I got much less out of this book than the previous two. I got the sense that despite being sidelined by plague the entire time, Audsley King is a great character, and I wish we could have met her under better circumstances. Maybe that's part of the point of the story. This is a series of short stories, all set in Viriconium, with one exception that I'll get to. But first, I know what you're wondering. Is there a dwarf? Yes, not only is there a dwarf, but we get some clarification as to how dwarves are made in Viriconium. Yes, made. Yeah. Anyway, we get return appearances from a variety of characters from the previous stories, and some interesting new ones. The stories themselves are mostly along the lines of the Floating Gods, or in Viriconium in tone. Light on the science, leaning much more heavily toward actual fantasy. Except for the last story, which takes place in present-day England, and gives the exact location of the mirror that can take you to Viriconium. So I'll see you there. With the series being less and less my jam as it went on, you may be wondering how or why I stuck with it. It wasn't for this video. I would have just DNF'd it and never brought it up. No, it was the quality of the prose, the way M. John Harrison puts words together, that kept me going all the way to the end. Man, can that guy ever turn a phrase. I tried to find a few passages to spotlight, but they're also intertwined with the context that they wouldn't make much sense outside the story. Watch. There was a sudden hiss of indrawn breath, a flurry of hoofs. The knife flickered out from somewhere, a blemished steel tongue in the gray light. The old man gasped once and was silent. They remained locked together for a long moment, like lovers. Above them, somewhere up in the dark morning, a huge bird shrieked. The madwoman began to ride round them in circles, whimpering and waving her arms. Hornrack laughed madly. "I'll go no further, full Thor! I've been this way before. It's a road to nothing!" Suddenly he stared into the face of his hostage as if he saw his own death there. What? Fear stretched his thin, brutalized features. The old man opened his throat, retched, squawked inhumanly, then seemed to smile. Oh! Oh! Cried Fade Glass, staring upward. Alsteth Fulthor, his brain an empty beach across which were scattered the bones of understanding, felt rather than saw something detach itself from the racing clouds above. And the names of characters and places, just absolutely fantastic. So, my final verdict on Viriconium. Absolutely love the Pastel City. A Storm of Wings starts slow, but more than makes up for it in the end. And as a sci-fi fan, I can take or leave the rest, though it's very well put together. I think I'm a fan of the Dying Earth subgenre when it leans much more towards the sci-fi end of the spectrum. So the real question is, do I take the plunge into the Book of the New Sun? Let me know in the comments.